Welcome to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. Back again with another vibe for all you. And this one is sort of somber, sort of serious. Okay, like I said, I'm from a small island called Grenada. And I've told you guys this before. And we've had sort of a tumultuous history. Back in 1979, we had a revolution. And then 4 years into the revolution, we had a coup d'etat, which is another small revolution. And then we had an intervention slash invasion in 1983, October the 25th, 1983. This what we're going to watch here is called Grenada, Lessons from a Cold War. Lessons from a Cold War. So let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer.
Grenada, in many ways a typical laid-back Caribbean hideaway. These days, tourism is what it's famous for. Few of the thousands of visitors that come to relax here will pay much attention to this spectacular island's relatively recent, complicated history. Robert Ross is an exception.
You see that airport there? I live within walking distance of that airport. All I have to do is walk down the village road, out onto the highway, turn right, and just keep walking, and I'll be right on the airport. That's so significant.
Arriving here on vacation, he wasn't sure what to say when immigration asked him if he'd been to Grenada before. He had, but the last time he parachuted in onto the same runway now used by commercial jets.
I actually landed between those big double stripes and the next little smaller stripe.
Robert, a former Army Ranger, took part in the 1983 US invasion here. So what brought Robert and 7,000 US military personnel to this tiny island in the Caribbean? Why did this remote outpost briefly become the focus of the United States, Cuba, and...
I think that place is called Calibini Island. I'm not sure if there's Grenadians watching this, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of military maneuvers happening there during the revolution by what we call the PRA, People's Revolutionary Army.
The Cold War.
Long live friendship, solidarity.
Dude, I remember them times, man. I went to a couple of those rallies there, man. That dude is to rile the crowd up. It's just weird. It's so surreal to think that and people are gone, and they've been gone so long.
1979, Maurice Bishop, a British-educated lawyer, seized power in Grenada as the leader of a popular leftist uprising. He declares himself Prime Minister while the incumbent is overseas. Rival political...
No, the incumbent he's speaking of, his name was Eric Matthew Geary. And he was the Prime Minister for 25 years at the time. And I remember one of the speeches he was giving in New York at the time was about UFOs. Because I remember people talking about, he's up there talking about UFOs and we still get struggling. There's Maurice Bishop.
Political parties are soon banned. An eloquent orator, many were struck by his easygoing style.
When if you drive around Grenada, you see the most...
Dr. Terry Marichaud, now a general practitioner in Grenada, volunteered to be Bishop's bodyguard.
Oh, Bishop was a down-to-earth, charismatic, a person who loved this country, a patriot, somebody who was willing to give his life for his country.
In all of the other areas...
And it wasn't just many Grenadians that were impressed by Bishop's charm. He'd also caught the attention of Cuban President Fidel Castro, who later said the US government despised Grenada and it hated Bishop. Bishop was not an extremist, although yes, he was a true revolutionary, conscientious and honest. Never could we disagree with his intelligent and realistic policies. As well as offering his support to Bishop, Castro was quick to send hundreds of Cuban advisors and technicians to Grenada.
Yo, I remember they came flooding in, boy. And up until that point, we were like, ooh, the dreaded Cubans, the communists. And this is gonna, listen, we met those people and it's like, they're just people just like us. I expected these brutish, angry, goose-stepping, crazy people. And then we were like, hey, they drinking rum and thing. At least that's what I thought. It's like, they drunk in the village, walking through the village all the time.
Amongst them was Irma Veitia. In her 20s, she was asked to leave her native Havana and go to Grenada as an English language translator.
I was one of the many lucky Cubans who were assigned to different missions in Grenada. So I was a translator for the Cuban personnel at the beginning, and then I was assigned to work as a translator at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the government of Grenada.
The new airport will have a 9,000...
The most high-profile project the Cubans were involved in was the funding and...
Dude, I remember that airport being built. I was old enough to know all of that stuff. I was 19 at the time. And I remember they turned the highway out, the Chubu Highway, into this big dust bowl. A friend of mine, we had houses lining it from our village. And I remember a friend of mine taking a shower, and then he stepped outside, and a big truck would go by, dust all over him. Got to go back in and clean up. I absolutely remember that. There was a place down there we used to just go chill out. I ain't gonna lie, smoke some, stuff, and go chill out and just watch them do their thing.
Construction of this airport.
But the problem was that they did not have airports prepared to receive big planes and, thousands of tourists a year and that kind of thing. So the Cuban contingent was working in the construction of a new airport, an international airport, to the south of the island. That was at Point Salines.
Cargo planes and for jets.
As work continued, the United States began to worry. President Reagan saw this not as a project to boost tourism. He viewed it as a threat to regional security.
At the southern end of the Caribbean chain, the Cubans, with Soviet financing and backing, are in the process of building an airfield with a 10,000-foot runway. Grenada doesn't even have an air force.
Reagan also justified threatening.
Didn't have an air force, didn't have an army before the People's Revolutionary Army was found. Our cops didn't carry them. My grandfather was a cop, my dad was a cop, other family members were cops. The revolution ushered in so many guns. At one point they were saying that there was enough guns on that island for every man, woman, and child. There was so much guns on that island. That's why, people always, whenever people mention guns and stuff, I have like an adverse reaction to it. There's a reason for that.
Military action by the fact that there was a medical school with 700 American students right at the end of the runway. Whether it was the threats from Reagan or the pressure of power in Grenada, the political situation began to worsen. An estimated 3,000 opponents of Bishop were at...
That's that prison, man. I used to call it the dungeon. I've been in there one time, and not because my dad was a cop for some reason. I don't know why I went in there, but call it the dungeon.
At some stage detained without trial. Amongst them was Winston White, a former minister in the pre-revolutionary government. He had known Bishop since childhood.
I had no doubt in my mind at all where he was leading us to. Which was? into the Soviet camp. I had no doubt about that. Castro was just a midway stop. It was on to Moscow we were bound.
White spent over 4 years inside Grenada's notorious Richmond Hill prison. He prayed for outside help.
Well, we, of course, in the dungeons up at Richmond Hill, were praying day and night that President Reagan would, in fact, do something. Let not this be only talk. Because there was no way that there were no signals of us coming out up there.
Complaints about mass torture.
But then there was an unexpected twist to the revolution. Bitter infighting broke out within the ruling party. After a tumultuous few days, Maurice Bishop and several of his ministers were executed here at what was then the Revolutionary Army headquarters.
I think it was the 19th that happened, and the 25th the invasion happened. But it's like yesterday, dude. I could close my eyes right now and remember the explosions up there. Now that's a place I used to go to a lot. Like I said, my dad was a policeman. Now, what you don't see is that there's a place in the back of the fort where when the fraction of the People's Revolutionary Army came up to go after Bishop, and then people were jumping over it. I think it's like a 40-50 foot drop, trying to get away from the shooting.
Callistus Bernard led the firing squad which killed Bishop. He served 27 years in prison for his crime and was released in 2009. He had not visited this place since. Bernard does not attempt to justify his actions, but he says that inexperience...
I do remember them saying he was the one that actually pulled the trigger. I do remember that after that. Now, here's the thing, during the whole revolution thing, I didn't really feel unsafe, I guess, because a lot of these people, like, I went to school with them, or my brothers went to school with them. I used to watch them play cricket all the time, and sometimes I even get on the cricket games with them, soccer games. And a lot of them went to a place called the Presentation Brothers College, where my older brother went. So we used to go up there and play soccer and cricket and all kinds of stuff.
And international pressure took the revolution he had passionately supported towards a precipice.
What happened with revolution, you have a lot of power concentrated in your hands. You have, you don't have no checks and balances. And anybody needs checks and balances.
Despite being an admirer of Cuba, he is critical of its involvement.
But what happened now in power now, the Cubans they, in a sense, took sides. Their model is that you had to have a man.
That's that drop I was telling you about, or part of it. People were jumping over there trying to get over, And you know what's funny about this place? This is a place where, when I was a kid, they used to have they had a police band, they call it, and they used to have concerts back there, and us kids would go out there, and this is overlooking the natural harbor to this side. People were jumping off of there trying to get away from the gunfire. I remember the smoke coming out of there.
On top, a maximum leader, right? And everybody else had to follow in line with him. That was their genuine model, because that's the model they have of Fidel. He is the maximum leader, and he wanted to impose that on Grenada.
A nearly defenseless people in a region of great strategic importance to the free world.
Reagan, meanwhile, saw the chaos in Grenada as both an incentive and an opportunity to act.
United States paratroopers have invaded Grenada with helicopter gunship. Our armed...
I remember that speech right there on the radio. I remember that speech right there on the radio. And I remember Bob Marley's song, Get Up, Stand Up, playing. Get guns, get machetes, get stones. Those helicopters, man. You could hear the fire from the gunship. Pop, 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 pop. And it was hard to distinguish because I ain't never heard stuff like that before. It was hard to distinguish the gunfire from the rotors, or whatever they call it that spins. I don't know.
Forces are engaging them in fierce battle. All Grenadians report immediately to our respective militia bases. All
I remember
doctors,
that
nurses, and medics
because we had a militia too, and I remember them saying that. I remember that.
report to the hospital immediately.
On the 25th of October, Operation Urgent Fury was launched. Army Ranger Robert Ross, then based in Savannah, Georgia, had no idea where Grenada was when the call came in.
Never heard of the place before. I remember they called us in on alert on a Sunday morning. And when I got there, they said, okay, this is the real deal. We're going into Grenada. I was like, what?
In one sign of a lack of preparedness, the American invaders had no military charts of the island. They adapted tourist maps.
This is the point where we had a fighting position set up here. And there was guys across the street, the runway here, firing at us. And the only way to get across the runway, we found a bulldozer. We straight wired the bulldozer, and we put Sergeant Bowles on it. Everybody got behind the bulldozer and fought across the runway up the hill to take on the enemy.
So who was the enemy? Were you fighting Grenadians or Cubans?
Both. We was fighting Grenadians and Cubans. A lot of the people that was part of the resistance.
Irma Vatia watched it all unfold.
Well, we Cubans had a meeting the day before the invasion. It was there was no doubt that the Americans would come and invade the island. And when we went out, we were able to see that the helicopters were already dropping the parachuters, and they were occupying the area where the Cuban workers were building the runway of the future, or what could be the airport. We responded to the attack, but we had no means to really fight it.
See, all over the world, we have people romanticizing war. You know what I mean? You have people just fighting everywhere, and they're romanticizing this stuff. There's nothing romantic about war. Nothing at all. Nothing romantic about mutilated bodies. Nothing romantic of all those loud bangings and booms and flares in the middle of the night, so bright it just lights up everything. And I was alone in that house that I live in. At night, no lights, and all you could hear is just footsteps running outside. You don't know if it's soldiers, you don't know if it's villagers just running and trying, checking up on the people. You don't know what's going on. I'll be honest with you, man. I smoked a lot. That kept me going.
Against that invasion, we needed weapons, but powerful weapons, They had ships, the helicopters, the 82nd Airborne Division.
See, and,
so there were a handful of Cubans with a...
They're saying that there's a lot of guns on the island, man. There's a lot of guns. Listen, at some point they were saying there was a gun for every man, woman, and child on the island. That's how many guns was floating around on there. So we went from a country that didn't see much guns because our cops had like the old British 303 rifles. Some of it was even rusty. All of a sudden, there's AK-47s. There's There's Yugoslavian or Czechoslovakian guns, Makarov pistols, man, anti-aircraft guns, armored cars. So it's just all this military stuff all of a sudden, all over the place. They would have, I remember they would have military maneuvers in the valley next to where I live, and at night you could just hear, and that's the People's Revolutionary Army, you know what I mean? But the thing about it is I look out my back door and I could see them up there, and I could go, hey, there's so, hey, then, you know, I actually knew people, schoolmates. I always wonder what happened to a lot of them, man. Been gone a while.
Few rifles.
This complex looked like a large storage and
the American military says it did face heavily armed resistance and during the invasion discovered a large hoard of weapons.
Over this hill, we found a warehouse.
Sorry about that. I was trying to pause it to say something. But I remember that warehouse. I didn't really know what was in it. I know there was a lot of Cuban cigars floating around there. Didn't know the importance of that neither. But I remember that warehouse. I could walk over a hill and there it was.
That contain over 110,000 weapons, which the island, as I remember, had a population of 110,000 people. There was enough weapons that was found that could give every man, woman, and child a weapon.
The invasion was condemned with a large majority by the UN General Assembly as a flagrant violation of international law. And British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was apparently furious that her close ally Ronald Reagan had not warned her of his plan to invade a country which was still a member of the British Commonwealth. The president had to make an excruciatingly difficult phone call.
Hello, Margaret Thatcher.
If I were there, Margaret, I'd throw my hat in the door before I came in. Listen, we regret very much the embarrassment that's been caused you, and I'd just like to tell you what the story is from our end out here. I was awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning, supposedly on a golfing vacation down in Georgia, and was there with the Secretary of State, and so we met in pajamas out in the living room of our suite to, because of this this urgent plea from the Organization of East Caribbean States, pleading with us to support them in this thing in Grenada. When your word came of your concerns, by the time I got it, the 0 hour had passed and our forces were on their way.
45 Grenadians, 25 Cubans, and 19 Americans were killed during the US intervention. At a speech honouring the Cubans that died, Fidel Castro criticised the coup that had ousted Bishop, but said the decision to try to help Grenada repel the US invasion was the right one. Cuba, he said, was placed in a morally complex and difficult situation. Under these conditions, he explained, we, under no circumstances, could abandon the country. If imperialism really intended to attack Grenada, our duty was to remain there. To withdraw at that moment would have been dishonourable and could even have stimulated the aggression, now in Grenada and tomorrow in Cuba. Winston White, meanwhile, was in prison when he heard the commotion surrounding the US invasion. How did he react?
Gleefully, because then you knew what liberation time had come.
But what about people who say that this is an act of the big imperialist kind of taking over the island?
Nonsense. No, absolute nonsense. I mean, they should have been inside there, then they would have been happy that the big imperialist came.
In a nearby cell was Tillman Thomas, who would later become Prime Minister of Grenada.
I mean, the Prime Minister was executed. Several of his cabinet ministers were executed. The whole nation, island, was under house arrest. You know, people couldn't come out to get basic...
I remember that too. The guys who did the coup, Bernard Code, they lock us down, dude. I remember staying inside the house. I don't have any food. Too scared to go outside. Luckily, in my backyard, I had a garden, so you know, I had chickens and stuff. So you know, I used to sneak outside in order to get, you know. I remember like jeeps going through the village, and I'd look out my door and I'd see people and no drive back in these jeeps, you know. And this is during the coup and before the arrest, before the invasion happened. Man, so scared, dude. And you know, I mean, at that point, I wasn't really scared yet, per se. But people in the village, you know, were scared. They could hear screaming and stuff periodically. I remember we would go out into the street, not the highway itself, but into just the street in the village, and we'd hear a jeep coming, and everybody would run back into the house real quick. You know what I mean?
Necessities for a few days. I mean, so there was need for some form of intervention to restore democratic rights and to restore institutions. It was like anarchy.
Like all the other Cubans on the island, Irma was rounded up by the American soldiers.
Well, after 1 week at what they call the concentration camp in Point Salines, we returned to Cuba.
I remember seeing that. That was the first time I seen those barbed wire fences too. Hoarded in there, man. Probably most of them had hangovers.
First of all, they line up all the personnel, all the women first, and then the rest of the personnel. And they said on the march, and we walked and walked and walked. We didn't know where they were taking us. And finally, we stopped at a certain point. After an hour walking around the island, we stopped at a certain point, and they told us that we had to wait there. Then the International Red Cross came with some transportation, and they took us to the old airport in Grenada, and there we boarded.
That old airport is called Paul's Airport. So I remember that airport, and the main thing I remember that airport is when my mom left the island. That's the last time I saw my mom on the island. When she got into that little plane, because the airport was so small, you had to get into a small plane and go to Barbados, which is another island that had a bigger airport, and then you go to London, England, or you come to New York or something like that. But I remember that Paul's Airport.
A plane that brought us back to Cuba.
41 years after the invasion, few physical reminders remain, and most of the scars of that divisive time have also healed.
Grenada, island of spice.
In 2009, the airport was officially named after Maurice Bishop. Tillman Thomas, Prime Minister at the time, approved of the idea, even though he had been imprisoned by Bishop.
That project is really a...
That's respect right there. The man that imprisoned him, he still says, hey, name the airport after the dude. The dude did this. That's respect.
Project that people identify with the revolution. And if you have to name that after somebody, we feel that Bishop was the appropriate person.
Ironic, but I let it go because Fidel Castro really made a great contribution to the building of the airport.
Callistus Bernard, who admits being involved in the killing of Bishop and spent 5 years on death row, has more reason than most to believe in forgiveness.
We survived, right? And it's our obligation now to really, do as much as we could to really promote healing and reconciliation, because these were terrible events, these were terrible times.
Irma Veitia, meanwhile, who in 1983 left Grenada in handcuffs, recently returned.
To my surprise, to my delight, I found a different Grenada. The country has developed a lot. Tourism is the main industry at the moment. Some of those people who studied here in Cuba many years ago are now in leading positions in different sectors of the government and the country as such.
There are some who suggest that while the US might have won the battle here, they didn't necessarily win the war. Maurice Bishop's former bodyguard points out that despite being expelled, the Cubans soon returned.
They still came back and built a hospital for us. They still sent many of their professionals to work in our hospitals and to work in all different fields in Grenada. And they're still very welcome in Grenada because people see them as genuine friends of the Grenadian people who are always willing and ready to help. You compare that to the United States, which was the invading forces. But what have they done for Grenada in 30 years? Literally nothing. There's nothing.
Definitely my old stomping ground right there. If I'm not mistaken, remember, well, I don't think I told this story, but Maurice Bishop's father was murdered. I think it's this building here, and I think if there's Grenadians watching this, correct me down there. I think that's the trade union building where it happened. I was living somewhere up here at the time, I do believe. Looks a little different. I was actually born in a house in this area here. I think it's further that way. So was my brother, Tyrrell Street, Green Street. My sister was born on a house right on the waterfront there.
Thing that you can point to as a monument that says this is something that Americans built for us after the invasion, that we can uphold as part of that love and cooperation between the United States and Grenada. In fact, the Chinese have come in and have done more than the United States. You have brand new.
We used to have parades and stuff, and I remember my dad dressing up in this stuff here. The tunic and the helmet.
New stadium.
The guy in khaki, my grandfather used to dress like that. Inspector of police.
That they built for us.
But plenty of others are grateful for the US invasion, which they see as preventing this small island from taking a path to disaster. Winston White here meets for the first time one of the men he says saved his life.
How you doing, my brother?
Man, I'm very good, thanks to you. I am alive.
I was a paratrooper, yes. I was number 5 to land on the...
I'll tell you a story about that. Okay, I live in West Virginia, and I've met so many people that actually were part of the military from here that went there. And I remember this story, and it's a story that I thought was just a nightmare I was having for years. And I worked with him at a toy store here, and he started to talk to me and stuff like that, and off and on. And then he told me he was in Grenada. And usually when somebody here tell me they were in Grenada, I said 1983, right? And he said, how do you know? I said, how else would you know? You know what I mean? Because just a working class guy. And he told me that he had friends that were in the airborne, and he remembered the friends telling him that when they were parachuting in, And they were firing anti-aircraft guns at them, and some of them would explode in the air. And I remember standing outside on my veranda watching this come in, smoking. And I remember seeing that, and for years I thought it was just a nightmare I was having. I never really told my brothers and them about that because I thought I was just dreaming, because I have really weird dreams anyway. And then he said that, and I'm like, wow.
Number 5 is a secret number.
It's a secret number? Okay, it was for me, it worked.
What happened here had repercussions that went far beyond the shores of this small island nation. Many historians believe that the invasion of Grenada was a turning point for the foreign policies of both the United States and Cuba. For the US, the episode helped bury the ghost of Vietnam and convinced many in Washington that an interventionist foreign policy could be justified.
The world has changed. Today, our national security can be threatened in faraway places. It's up to all of us to be aware of the strategic importance of such places and to be able to identify them.
Cuba, meanwhile, in the years to follow, was arguably far more cautious about exporting or appearing to export its revolution. Since 1983, Grenada has maintained notably good relations with both the...
See that hill right there? That hill is called Market Hill. I remember coming home from school one time and tumbling down that hill. And I know it's probably going to look a lot smaller now when I go back, but when I was a kid, that was one steep hill, I tell you. I tumbled down that hill, boy. That was painful.
The United States and Cuba. As those nations prepare to bury some of their differences and another chapter of the Cold War closes, perhaps they should look to this island as an example of reconciliation.
War isn't romantic, guys. Fucks with a lot of people's heads. See, all over the world, man. See, we've been fighting for so long. It's like my whole life there's a war going on over something. We fight over these isms and schisms and religion and race and nationality and all of that. Where has it gotten us? Look around us. Where are we now? Worldwide, where are we now? Conspiracy theories, people not trusting their neighbors. On my Facebook page, I see people fighting, family members fighting. It's like craziness. All these wars all over this world, where has it gotten us? Are we at peace? Do we even have freedom? Anywhere in this world, anywhere. Freedom is just not something that's physical. It's also psychological. It's kind of spiritual. It's free. Freedom is free. Or it should be. Because we're human. We should have that. It's not a right. It's intrinsic. We ain't that different. I don't see why we keep fighting over stuff. We all react to things, crisis, the same. We do. And you know, when you live in another country and you don't travel to another country, the perception is usually what you see in the news and stuff like that. So when I landed here, it's like, wait a minute, just like I felt about the Cubans, wait a minute, they're just people too. Most of us in this world work from paycheck to paycheck until we die, or until we retire and wait to die. Most of us do. We work hard. We all want the same things, and we all seem to think that respective systems will get us to those same places, and we fight to maintain those systems and have those systems be above other systems. But do we really feel free? Is freedom the advancement in technology, or is it the advancement in human interaction, human compassion? I'm on a soapbox, but I think this calls for that. Are we going to just keep fighting and ending up in the same spot? Because, history just keeps repeating itself. And history is also written by those who want to control the narrative of what is going on in the present and what is going on in the future. Think about it. We fighting all the time. And it used to be that the fighting was kind of subdued to the point where it doesn't affect us, but now it's affecting us spiritually, it's affecting us psychologically. Everybody's so on edge. This doesn't feel like freedom. Nowhere in this world. Doesn't feel it. We gotta start acting human at some point. We gotta realize we're more alike than we are different. Even if we live in different systems, we still react to things the same way. Period. Not that different. And all that fighting is not romantic. Time to come out of the darkness and into the light, according to like Bob Marley and them. We have a really beautiful world. Can't you see in those pictures there how pretty that is? Even here, you walk on the street and you see the mountains, man. It's gorgeous. Why don't we relax and enjoy that stuff? Why don't we relax and enjoy each other? Hey, you're different. That's so cool. Let me learn about you with an open mind. Not learn about somebody else to act like you're better than them. Grenada, great place to live. America, great place to live. London, great place to live. My mother always said, if you look hard enough, there's good people everywhere. Most people are good. It's just dictated by circumstances that make them react certain ways. Kind of like all these guys I went to school with. It's like, what are you doing? Why the guns? And it's this vicious cycle. It went around. And we back here going, what do? We love each other. That's what we do. I'm gonna let you guys go, man. Make life cool runnings, okay?